3 weeks after my husband's funeral, a woman knocked on my door holding a marriage certificate with his name on it, dated 2 years before ours. "I'm his wife," she said calmly, like she'd rehearsed it 100 times in her car outside. I stood there in the doorway, still wearing his sweater, completely unaware that the man I'd buried had apparently never actually been mine to bury alone. Her name was Denise. She had a son, 12 years old, with my husband's exact eyes staring up at me from a photograph she held out like evidence in a trial I hadn't known I was part of. She explained they'd married quietly 8 years ago, that he traveled constantly for work, disappearing for weeks at a time between two entirely separate households neither of us had ever suspected existed. I nearly slammed the door, certain this was some cruel scam targeting grieving widows online. Instead, I asked to see everything, and she handed me a folder thick with proof, wedding photos, tax documents, a mortgage statement for a house 2 states away that I genuinely never heard mentioned once in 11 years of marriage. My husband had built an entire second life running parallel to mine. I contacted his employer immediately, the consulting job that supposedly required constant travel. They confirmed he'd worked remotely from home for the past 6 years, no travel required whatsoever. Every business trip, every late flight, every hotel receipt I'd never questioned had actually been him disappearing quietly into a completely different family's dinner table 3 states away. Denise and I compared calendars obsessively over the following week, matching dates with growing horror. He'd missed my birthday for an emergency conference the same week he'd apparently attended his son's school play, according to Denise's photos. The lies hadn't just been separate. They'd been carefully, deliberately woven together to protect both households simultaneously for years. The life insurance policy became the next devastating discovery. He'd named me as sole beneficiary on paper, but Denise produced a second, older policy naming her son instead, purchased through a different company entirely. Payments withdrawn from an account I'd genuinely never known existed in his name alone, hidden separately from every joint account we'd shared throughout our marriage. I hired a lawyer immediately, uncertain whether my own marriage was even legally valid given his apparent prior undissolved one. The answer, when it finally came, was more complicated than either of us expected. He'd never actually divorced Denise. Legally, she was his only real wife. I'd unknowingly spent 11 years married to a man who was already, quietly, permanently married to someone else. Denise, to her credit, didn't treat me like an enemy once the shock settled between us. "He did this to both of us," she said quietly over coffee neither of us really drank. "We're not the ones who lied." Slowly, cautiously, we started comparing notes, not as rivals, but as two women independently deceived by the exact same careful, patient dishonesty for the better part of a decade. His son, Tyler, eventually asked to meet me, curious about the woman his father had apparently loved simultaneously in some other life he'd never known about. We met at a park, awkward and careful. Two strangers connected by a man neither of us fully understood anymore, despite years spent believing we knew him completely, thoroughly, without any hidden rooms left unexplored. The estate settlement took nearly a year, splitting assets between two households that had technically never been legally allowed to coexist. I lost the legal claim to marriage, but gained something unexpected, a strange, careful friendship with Denise and her son, bonded permanently by betrayal instead of blood, learning to rebuild trust from the wreckage he'd left scattered across two families. I still don't fully understand how he managed it for so long, or why loving one family required so completely erasing evidence of the other. If you found out your marriage was never legally real because your spouse never divorced someone else, could you ever forgive them, even after death? Comment yes or no below, and tell me honestly. Subscribe for more true family secret stories that'll leave you speechless.